Game over. It is game over.
Game over, cancer.
I'm Val Solomon, Director of Program Impact at Cannonball Kids Cancer Foundation.
And I'm Dana Nichols, Executive Director of CKC.
Game Over, Cancer, a podcast dedicated to exploring conversations about pediatric cancer research, solutions, and inspiring family stories.
We're a nonprofit dedicated to creating innovative treatment options for kids fighting cancer and educating for change.
By creating a space for these conversations, we empower the community to take action and provide tangible hope.
Game over, cancer. Screw you, cancer. Well, today's episode rounds out our 10 years of impact. And so we end where we start, with the very first recipient of a CKC grant, the man who started it all for us, from funding and for a lot of the protocols we have in place with our scientific advisory board.
That's right. We were the first to invest in his research. He was our first investment as a researcher. And as you'll hear during our conversation, he has paid it back tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold by this point. And we're just really thrilled to share his story.
So we are so excited for you to hear from our friend and a CKC bestie for sure, Dr. Ted Johnson.
Our guest today is a professor of pediatric oncology and co-director of the Pediatric Immunotherapy Program at Augusta University. The Pediatric Immunotherapy Program, or PIP, is designed specifically as a destination program to provide highly specialized experimental immunotherapy treatments for children with brain cancer from around the country who may not have other options for continued therapy. Using indoxamed-based immunotherapy for children with advanced brain cancer, PIP strives to improve their survival while maintaining or improving their ability to engage in daily activities. Over the past 10 years, the PIP program has provided access to experimental immunotherapy for more than 260 children and young adults coming from more than 30 different states. So super important work. Our first ever recipient of a CKC grant and the first member of our scientific advisory board, which he then chaired for nearly 10 years.
He's given us so
Everything.
much time, and then we asked him to come on the podcast,
That's
what
right.
You're saying.
Yes, we are here to introduce you to the unbelievably generous Dr. Ted Johnson.
Hello there. How are you?
Very well. Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. It was great.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes. Thank you for always saying yes when you can, and sometimes more than you should. So we appreciate it. Well, we thought we'd just start with a little bit of catching up, or you telling us what's going on in your lab right now, your world right now up in Augusta.
Gosh, where to start? You know, the newest things that we're doing, we've amassed quite a large biological sample bank from children who've been on the pediatric immunotherapy trials over the last 10 years. And so we have spent the last 5 years or so developing really sophisticated deep sequencing techniques that allow us to see the immune responses as they begin to unfold, from activation to clonal expansion of T cells, and see the T cells actually assume a killer phenotype, which tells us that they're armed with all the molecular machinery they need to go kill cancer cells. We do all that from patient blood samples, which we collect once a month while kids are on therapy. And some kids have been on, stay on therapy for years, and some kids only a few months. But we're able to see this immune activation, I think, at a level of clarity and detail that hasn't been done before. And since we have kids who have activated immune systems, in pediatric immunotherapy, that's a rare thing. There's lots of clinical trials out there, but many of them fail to actually activate the immune system. So the indoxamed-based treatment protocols have been able to do that for many, many kids, but some kids don't get activated immune systems. So using these immune monitoring techniques, we can actually see if the kids who have immune activation end up doing better clinically than the kids who don't. And it turns out that that's true. If you successfully activate your immune system and it begins to fight your tumor, you do have better clinical outcomes. So that's been a really big advance in what we've been doing in the last couple of years.
But something that wouldn't exist without, a whole body of research and work for the last 10 years.
A lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, what enabled that was the decision at the very beginning, partly because we had funding that we didn't expect to get in different areas, and one of those would certainly be Cannonball Kids cancer, that allowed us to write into the very first phase 1 protocol that we would collect these blood samples once a month for as long as kids stayed on therapy, and we would save them. And we didn't know at that time what we would do with them, but it created a bank of samples from before kids started treatment and every month after they're on treatment. And if you're the type of immunotherapy that we do, your immune responses can get stronger month after month, because every time you get a cycle of 5 days of oral chemotherapy, it damages the tumor a little bit and re-stimulates immune responses that have gone dormant. And that's like a vaccine booster. So you start at, a low level of immune activity, and the first cycle, maybe a little more, maybe a little more, maybe a little more. But the idea is that cycle over cycle, your immune responses can get stronger. And so you can have really late responses. We've seen kids not respond until 10 or 12 months into therapy, but maintain stable disease over that period of time and then respond. So the decision, it was a really key decision to save every blood sample from every single month that's drawn right before you start that cycle of therapy, that has let us see these responses unfold, because they happen at different times in different children. And if we hadn't had the seed funding, we probably would have had to make some economic choices that would have kept us from, we probably would have chosen a few time points, for instance, instead of every month.
Wow. That's phenomenal. I didn't know that. It's every time, we've alluded to it a little bit, but we talk with Dr. Johnson quite a bit over the course of CKC's history, which we'll get into in a minute. But I feel like every time we chat, I learn a little bit more about, pediatric cancer as a whole and as an environment and the funding, but also even about our own impact. That's phenomenal. I can't wait to share that with donors, right?
Yeah. I love to hear a choice in a process that really has like an exponential gain later, is really incredible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned it a little bit, but Dr. Johnson was our first investment from way back 10 years ago when CKC got started. So a lot of what we've been talking about this year with our 10 years of impact really started with that first grant going to Dr. Johnson. And we wondered if you could, for posterity's sake on the podcast, talk a little bit about that time and meeting the Wiggins and that first investment, if you could share that story.
Sure. Well, I think investment's the right way to look at it, because, I just mentioned our biological sample bank. We now have literally thousands of blood samples and hundreds of tumor samples that we can do immunology research on from patients who either did or did not respond to the immunotherapy that we give. So we can figure out perhaps what about their blood or tumor kept them from responding if they didn't, and what promoted those responses if they did. So the number of kids that we've hit or that we've touched with this treatment has, you mentioned in the introduction, over 260. We're close to 270 now, and that's just in the couple of weeks since we updated those numbers. It's really a snowball effect, and it all started back in, I was recruited back to Augusta University right as I was finishing my fellowship at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And I say back to Augusta University because this is where I got my medical degree and did my residency. And I was an MD PhD student here when I was getting my MD degree. I had worked in the lab that discovered the pathway that that we now study. It's called IDO, and that pathway is inhibited by the drug indoximab, which was invented in the labs that I was doing my PhD in. So I was recruited back to open a pediatric program for immunotherapy because the adult clinical trials were ongoing, but nobody was ever going to do a pediatric clinical trial unless we did. The scientists that had developed all the science is named David Munn, and he's my main partner now. But he had a handshake agreement with the drug company to that they would let us open clinical trials when the time came. And he viewed it as an opportunity that I was finishing my fellowship right as the phase 1 adult trials were getting finished, and they were going into phase 2. So we had to spend some time in the lab figuring out how to, decide which pediatric cancer to target to start with, that sort of thing. So it wasn't until about 2013 that we really had good evidence that the indoximab was improving chemo and radiation therapy in brain tumors in mice. And it was, and so we wrote a protocol, and we were trying to get it funded. We were trying to get the drug companies buy-in, and the drug company, it was very high risk for them because they're pediatric patients, they're brain tumor patients, they're very fragile patient population, and they've got a drug that's under development, and they don't need bad things to happen in some clinical trial they never would have opened on their own. They're never going to make money in kids because there's only, several hundred to a few thousand, kids that would qualify for the treatment down the road. So you need tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands adult patients to make money. So we probably wouldn't have been able to launch that phase 1 clinical trial of indoximab with chemo and radiation, which was launched in late 2015, if it wasn't for the investments that began to come in and donations and grants in 2014. Because the drug company needed to see that the scientific and medical community was behind this. And there's nothing that talks to a drug company like money. Showing that you've got the resources that, and actually, ultimately, the drug company actually funded that trial and probably spent millions of, I know they spent millions of dollars on it. And it was open at multiple sites. But at the time, we needed to show that we had the infrastructure, we had the resources, that we had other sites interested in opening and enrolling patients, and that the brain, the neuro-oncology community would support this, which vetted the trial in a way that, created a safety margin, I think, for the company's risk factor, right? So enter the Wiggins, Michael and Melissa, and they are just starting up a foundation. I've never heard of Cannonball Kids Cancer. They've been running it for about a year and collecting donations, and they've got a chunk of money that they aren't sure what to do with. And what I heard from them is that they talked to other people who had foundations to find out who might be who might have a clinical trial that was trying to get opened, but needed an investment. And my name came up. And so that is great for me and all the kids that we've treated since. But I got a phone call. Well, I got an email out of the blue that, we've got a foundation. It's called Cannonball Kids Cancer Foundation, and we'd like to talk to you we'd just like to talk to you. There really wasn't a lot of detail. So we scheduled a phone call, and it just we both had really busy, crazy schedules, and it turned out to be something like 8 or 9 o'clock at night
Yeah.
in order to work around all the kids' activities in the early evening and afternoon and stuff like that. So we're talking my kids are young at that point, so they're all in bed. So it must have been around 9 o'clock at night. And Melissa basically told me that they had, that she wanted a little bit of detail about what we were doing and what the clinical trial was and how it was going to help people. And at the end of the conversation, she said, we have $150,000 that we want to spend on a clinical trial, and we want you to be our first grant. So that came completely out of the blue. And it became the template for how CKC would approach researchers. For the first phase of CKC's grants, they would invite researchers to apply. And to some degree, that's still happening. But I think there's also a public element to this also.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you, as a researcher, and I told Michael and Melissa this and all the leadership at CKC over the years, it's very humbling and validating to have someone just out of the blue reach out and say, what you're doing is important enough for us to give you a check that's very large that is going to impact your program in ways that make it snowball I'm a good example, obviously, but I'm not the only researcher who's had great experience after they got their first CKC grant. And to be funding people sort of at the ground level and launching their research programs. It's really a great way to approach pediatric research funding in cancer. Because it pays huge dividends. The amount of energy that it generates, just the fact that that someone else thought your work was important enough to make that donation or that grant, it really propels you forward on. Let's face it, some days are not good days. But that is the kind of thing that makes people stay in it.
That's just so moving. We have so many of these conversations where it's like, yeah, that is what it feels like to work in this mission, right? And what strikes me as we're talking and hear you speak about those early days and that first investment is how important it was for CKC to identify what they could do and put money where they can, and to see it work so well, because I think that's what we spend a lot of time with our donors talking about too. That we have donors that make, large donations, but so many of our donors are somewhere between $50 and $100, right? And we're talking about finding a cure for pediatric cancer is a huge, long, complex problem. And you can almost talk yourself out of it by thinking, well, how much good can I do? And I think the investment of having $100,000, or now we have $200,000 clinical trial grants, finding the focus of who needs this money and how can they use that to propel an idea and have it snowball and garner more support from other places. And now CKC has researchers that get NIH funding, that get, like Dr. Johnson now. You have an incredibly accomplished portfolio of grant money coming from all different kinds of sources. And that's what, if we have $100,000 in the grand scheme of $1 million research project, where can we put it that will give it the longest runway and the most impact? And to hear you speak about it even now is just so moving. And we feel the same way. We're like, it does feel good working in this and making a difference with our side on our role too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that also what a leap of faith it takes. I think about that with the Wiggins. I think about that for you specifically, like a leap of faith of this idea. It's so wonderful to talk right now. Like, okay, well, this was 10 years ago. And so like, look at all we've done. But that first, we're laying this all out. And I remember when we've come to visit, these are our hallways of offices of people. These are all of our things, but you're really talking about you and one other person that you stole from another department kind of thing. And so it's always, to me, the key with what we're doing is to take the leap of faith on the unknown idea, because it's still very hard work, but easier work to get on a winning idea and get on the ball rolling. But starting to push that boulder up the hill is a whole different thing. And it's incredible to now be able to talk 10 years later, but only because of that moment.
What people don't understand, and a lot of people are very generous with their donations into foundations like CKC, but I hear that a lot. What you said about how much does my $50 matter, or how much does my $100 matter? It all matters. If it wasn't for $50 here and $100 there, then the large amounts that get plowed into research programs wouldn't add up. I tell people all the time, my entire program is funded on bake sales and different small fundraisers that we've gotten NIH grants through the years, but they have not been our major source of funding. There's only so much money that gets earmarked for or used for pediatric cancer research every year. And it is passed around an ever-expanding pie of researchers in pediatric cancer. We've been very successful in growing new researchers, but not new federal dollars, I think, to fill that gap. So how does that get filled? It gets filled by the foundations and philanthropy. That's the only way that you keep a program like this going. And the small donations are the bedrock of that, and they make a huge impact. And I tell everyone who funds our program that we make sure that those dollars touch children and families, and not only that, but this. I talked about the snowball effect. It's not just a snowball effect of building a program within the Department of Pediatrics and hiring people and having people and things and offices. It's about yesterday's science building on today's science and rolling forward into the next clinical trial and the next one and the one that comes after that. I've got 2 clinical trials that are in planning stage right now, and a couple of companion protocols that will go with those. And they'll be first in human combinations that nobody's ever tried or used or would know to try if we hadn't been doing what we've been doing for the past 10 years. And so that's how things begin to snowball. And it all starts with a $50 contribution or $100.
Yeah. Hey, double it, guys.
Yeah.
We need it. Gosh, I really appreciate you saying it. We'll take just that soundbite.
Yes.
And we'll ask people to give.
Yes.
And we're done. So I think one of the things that I know to be true is the other snowball was we continued to ask for your help and guidance over and over again for 10 years. And so many of the protocols that I see that we do or walked into when I got here and have established are from your guidance. So I wondered about speaking to that piece because we feel like, well, if we want to know what to do, we have to ask the people doing it. Seems like a given. And at the same time, I also think about someone getting we gave you money and now we're asking you next steps and you're like, whoa, I got to go do this trial. I got to go do the work that we all just agreed to. So I wondered about that perspective from you.
Well, it wasn't a hard decision to say yes to helping. It was so complimentary that we would have someone that we didn't even know call us up on the phone and, invest in our program on that level. That level of investment, sort of demands a reciprocity. And so that, I think, is what people call pay it forward. And so when I got involved with the Scientific Advisory Board, there was one person on it, and it was me. So,
this is so standard early CKC.
but in typical to my pattern of doing things, we called it a Scientific Advisory Board, even though it only had one person, because we always looked at where it should be, where it should be going. And so to name it correctly at the beginning was very important. To give it some direction and some sense. And we were very selective about who we invited. After a year or two, we began to invite people, and we were very careful about who we wanted. People who understood the philosophy of CKC and the idea that a lot of foundations are, and it's not anybody's fault because they don't know necessarily what should be done with money that they have gotten donated to them. But it's really easy to just fund research in a science lab, and if you have no focus or underlying bedrock principle that science should eventually somehow get to a pediatric patient and touch their lives in a positive way, then you may never get out of the science lab. So if you're a pediatric cancer foundation that's taking donations from people who want to help kids who have cancer, at some point you have to help kids who have cancer. And so that was really the driving principle of how we decided who to look at for funding, whose trials to think about funding, and who to ultimately actually give money to so that their programs could get off the ground. The idea that you weren't just stuck in the lab, that the next small lab experiment was the goal for the month. That if that's all your funding, then it's the way physician scientists get successful, is to have funding that leads to science, that leads to data that can get you published, that can get you more grants. And it's a never-ending circle and cycle. But if you don't inject some impetus to get to the clinic, then that cycle just plays over and over and over again. And really smart people never get out of the lab. Even though they have their own clinic and they go to the clinic and take care of kids with cancer, they may never get out of the lab. So through the years, the Scientific Advisory Board reached out to people who weren't in the clinic yet and pushed them to get to the clinic or to broaden their clinical trial to include populations that weren't already included. And I think that was a really unique approach for CKC as a foundation, to be not just focused on getting to the clinic, but to be making a difference in how people got to the clinic.
I think this speaks to, the role of foundations and philanthropy in problem solving, right? Like if you want to solve a problem or if you want something to exist, you have to put resources behind it. And so, the really, really good foundations are listening to the people affected, understanding the problem, and then figuring out a way to put resources where we need it to be in order to move the needle on that. And I just want to share with you, Dr. Johnson, that we were in our Scientific Advisory Board meeting last night to review review 2025 grant applications. And what I just kept thinking during that process, and it's kind of coming out in our conversation today, is just how much of that work that you had been doing with the Wiggins and with the Scientific Advisory Board in the beginning has truly carried through into, what we had last night, which is, a bunch of research grants, all like really well written, all really well targeted to what our mission is trying to accomplish. And then a board full, like a Zoom screen, truly square after square after square, so many people involved, all excited about the type of research that was being submitted. And I just kept thinking, I'm so glad we're talking to Dr. Johnson tomorrow. It's really full circle to see, like when you talked about naming it a scientific advisory board because you name what it should be. I really feel like last night when we had that meeting, that's what the goal was 10 years ago, was what we experienced last night.
Yeah, it was incredible. I'm going to, I know we're probably not supposed to get into small talk for a while. I'm going to text you a photo because we took a photo of the Zoom screen. So I really would love to send that to you because I think you're looking at people, so many diverse interests and people and specialties, and really like, I think I'm always struck by, we're talking so deeply about science, but somehow we're in like truly a philosophical debate about what's happening. And that translates to bringing that to our board of directors. And I just think like to have so many people engaged in that way. Yeah, that's exactly what the Wiggins hoped for when they called you. That's exactly what you were imagining in my mind when you start building this out. But then we actually get to sit in that world now. It's pretty cool for us. I think I think there's so much we could keep talking about in the idea of like that peek behind the curtain and all the things. But then we also, you did eventually, which I think everyone should. We talk a lot about like moving on, not from the mission or the cause, but you moved off the SAB, which again then leads to so many people.
Which I think space. 10 years that's a lot of time. That's probably 9 more than we should have asked you for.
Yeah. So there were all these people. We are so grateful.
But also you earned the right to not volunteer with us and to volunteer somewhere else.
Yeah. So I think we understand that you've moved to review on the NIH board. So we wondered some of your big picture experiences there in the past year or two. And then also, a topic that weighs on our mind a lot is the future of funding and what that looks like, and wondered what your insights are, good, bad, otherwise.
Well, so that's a lot of questions.
That's another hour of podcasting.
Firstly, I at the time, so yes, I left the Scientific Advisory Board, and I always viewed that as a necessary next step that I knew would one day come. And it was that the Scientific Advisory Board needed to not be me. It needed to have its own life. It had to have its own, it had to live and breathe and, function as an independent, entity. And from what you're telling me, that is what is happening. And so that's really wonderful to hear. And there's a danger when we start out as a small foundation and then you undergo a really massive growth spurt, that you can stagnate. And that is sometimes the people who start an organization have to move on in order for it to gain that perpetuity, in order for it to gain that ability to be self-sustained, I think is the way to look at that. So actually, I'm very gratified and happy that it seems to have spread its wings and be doing everything that CKC envisions for it. So that's wonderful. The NIH Review Board is dominated by adult oncology grants. It is, there are somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen pediatric grants every time we go through a cycle, and there's around 100 applications. So it's really dominated by adult grants, and the review board is dominated by adult oncology reviewers. There are surgeons, there are radiation oncologists, there are oncologists, there are specialists in different areas of adult oncology. And then there's somewhere between 2 and 4 or 5 pediatric oncologists in any given meeting. When I started, I was the only permanent member or standing member is what they call. So they have 2 types of members. The standing members come every meeting for 4 years, which is what I am. And then there are ad hoc members who are asked to be on a particular review session in order to have the expertise to review the pediatric grants, and it's not just pediatrics. About half the review board is ad hoc on any given meeting. We meet 3 times a year: February, June, and October. And the grants range. Some grants are all basic science, but the majority, because I'm on the clinical oncology study section, and there's lots of study sections within the National Cancer Institute, but that one is dominated by clinical trials. So it's been rewarding in a way to see what the adult immunotherapy trials are doing that's new. Some of it is very sort of incremental. They're going to use the same kind of immunotherapy that they've been using for 15 years with a slight change, or add a drug to it, and that's not really transformative. But every once in a while, and actually, there are several grants each study section meeting where they're really doing something unique, and it's really a cross-pollination that, of course, there's confidentiality regulations. You don't take someone else's ideas and use them, but it makes you think about maybe in a new way about what you're doing with your clinical trials, and it opens potentially. You can't reach out and collaborate with someone whose grant you reviewed. That's a conflict of interest. So you really are obligated to keep a wall of confidentiality. You can't talk to your partners or other researchers about grants that you've reviewed. So that's a confidentiality, a wall of confidentiality that has to be maintained. But and of course, you can't review grants that are written by someone you work with, or have an open collaboration with, or write a paper with. So, these are just important conflict of interest safeguards. But you can't read a grant that's very, very new and novel and groundbreaking and not think about how one day that science might be applied to pediatric cancer problems, right? So that's one of the real values I view in being involved in grant review at every level, including the foundation level. And my tenure on the clinical oncology study section ends after June in the upcoming year. So I will probably gravitate back to foundation reviews at that point.
That's awesome.
Good to know.
Yeah. We'll add it to our calendar. That's what I'm hearing. I think it's fascinating. And also I love hearing your longevity in the field, like moving, through so many things. It just is incredible. we're really, really grateful for the time you've given us and are so appreciative, always, of everything you do for us, for our mission, for the children. But specifically today, for coming on the podcast and chatting with us more is so, so kind. You're the reason we invest in research, right? We are fundraising all year to invest to make treatment easier for kids. And that's your life's work. We're so grateful to be part of it. If our listeners are interested in hearing more about the grants we fund, the research, the Scientific Advisory Board, or how to get involved and make a gift, you can go to cannonballkidscancer.org.
We want to thank everyone for listening to Game Over Cancer. Dr. Johnson is not our only episode where we're speaking with researchers, so definitely check out some of our other conversations, and you'll be able to hear, really what is the cutting edge things that are happening right now in pediatric cancer development. So.
Absolutely. So thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you joining us and making a commitment to be part of our fight. I'm Dana Nichols.
I'm Val Solomon.
And until next time, we will see ya in 2026.
2026. Join us as we transform fear into courage and turn adversity into opportunities for change.
If you want to be involved in the conversations that create change in the world of pediatric cancer, take a moment, share, like, and subscribe.